You've likely all been hearing quite a bit about the FBI these days. After all, they're involved in a pretty big investigation into foreign tampering in the US election. Oh, and there is that little story about the FBI director getting fired by President Trump. Yes, this somewhat shadowy organization is in the spotlight now. Because of this, we thought it was a good time to show you 10 lesser-known facts about the Bureau. From their beginnings to some of the more bizarre investigations and methods, these little-known facts about the FBI might actually cause more questions than answers. Now, since we can't send a field agent to your home for an interview, we'll simply ask you a quiz during the video to see if you're a credible candidate for the richest witness protection program. We'll ask it during the interview, so be sure to pay attention. Until then, hook up that polygraph machine and be sure to press those subscribe and notification buttons so we know you're totally on board with us. A secret birth. While today the Federal Bureau of Investigations has incredible reach across the entire United States, it wasn't always like this. In fact, there was a time when the US had no federal investigative crime-fighting force. Back in the early 20th century, America wasn't exactly the Wild West, but it had quite a few problems. Cities were growing and every state, region, and town had its own law enforcement, some being particularly worse than others. This made coordinating any sort of investigation a real problem. To make matters worse, Henry Ford's cars were coming off the assembly line, giving crooks something to not only steal, but to easily cross state lines with. Attorney General Charles Bonaparte, grandnephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, found that when he needed men to investigate crimes, he was actually borrowing them from the Secret Service. Naturally, with all the bureaucratic red tape, it was easier to create a separate force of investigators, which is what he did. In the spring of 1908, Bonaparte took several Secret Service agents, added a few more hand-picked investigators, and created a 34-man investigative unit. Operating under the Department of Justice, this marked the beginning of the FBI. Fingerprints. Today, criminal investigations involve collecting all sorts of evidence as part of the process of building a case. It wasn't always this way. Long before we had DNA or surveillance cameras everywhere, most evidence came in the form of whatever a witness saw. Obviously, witnesses aren't always the best source for investigations. Fast forward to the late 1800s, and law enforcement officials discovered that fingerprints were an ideal way to track criminals. Of course, today, the fingerprint is just a part of any criminal investigation. Yet it remains important. That's because your fingerprint is unique to you, and no two are alike. Now, the fact that the FBI uses fingerprints isn't exactly a secret, but did you know they had a massive record of fingerprints collected from US citizens? Stored in a very secure facility just outside of Clarksburg, West Virginia, the Bureau has fingerprint records of millions of people stored. In fact, they reportedly process upwards of 50,000 prints per day. Even if you have no criminal record, there's still a good chance they have your prints on file. After all, any jobs or applications that require you to submit a fingerprint sample likely results in a copy going straight to Clarksburg. Paper or plastic. Over the past decade, there has been a real surge in interest when it comes to knowing just how much the government is watching us. After all, thanks to Edward Snowden, we now know that various government departments have the ability to know who you call, what you search online, and what your text conversations contain. In fact, increasing your Facebook privacy settings or going incognito during your Google search doesn't prevent the man from knowing what you're up to if he wanted to see. Naturally, when we think of all-knowing and snooping government agencies, the FBI is included in the list. That said, until recently, the Bureau wasn't exactly the most modern in terms of the way it collected information. You see, up until 2012, the FBI was still a largely paper organization. What that means is that the majority of their case files were, well, stacks of paper. There was no super high-tech cross-referencing or computer-generated modeling like on CSI. No, instead we imagine it looked like something out of an 80s cop movie with agents going over folders full of info while downing cup after cup of coffee and remarking how they were getting too old for this business. 10-year terms. The director of the FBI is a very important person. As you've likely seen over the past few weeks, their role is pretty significant when it comes to the stability of the organization. So when they get fired, it rightfully causes problems. During this time, you may have heard something about a 10-year term limit. That's how long an FBI director holds their position for, usually. Now, you may be wondering why 10 years? After all, everything else in Washington is built around a 4-year term. The director's term is deliberately different from the politicians for a number of reasons. First, the length of time means the FBI leadership is not tied to any one government party or president. This supposedly prevents favoritism or bias among the FBI. The main reason, however, has to do with someone named J. Edgar Hoover. Maybe you've heard of him? Hoover ran the FBI for an incredible 48 years, and only his passing saw him leave the position in 1972. After his passing, evidence of blackmail, spying, and warrantless searches proved Hoover had abused his power, leading Washington to institute the 10-year limit as a check on future directors. The second time. You knew an entry about James Comey was coming. After all, since the email scandal and investigations of the late summer of 2016, the now former FBI director was at the center of all things Trump. With his firing, it set off a media storm of claims that Comey was the first director ever fired, and this was just like Richard Nixon's firing of a lead Watergate investigator in 1973. Well, yes and no. As far as Nixon's example goes, that president actually fired Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox, who was not an FBI director. That said, like today's events, the president's firing of someone investigating the White House didn't go over too well with most people. Fast forward to 1993 and we find President Bill Clinton at odds with FBI Director William Sessions. Clinton did remove Sessions, but the reasons were not political. You see, Sessions had been under investigation since the Bush administration for a range of wrongdoings and financial abuses. In that sense, no one was surprised when the firing actually occurred. So now you know when it comes to James Comey's firing by President Trump, he is the second director fired, but the first to be fired by a president who he was investigating at the same time. Okay, time for your field agent quiz. Victor Manuel Garena was placed on the 10 most wanted list after a 1983 robbery. Do you know what distinction Garena holds as a result of this? Think it over while we show you 5 more FBI facts you may not have known. Strange investigations. Every now and then a music band comes along that riles up adults in one way or another. Whether it's Kiss in the 1970s or Marilyn Manson in the 1990s, every generation has someone creating music deemed controversial. In 1963, a band called The Kingsmen did a cover of Richard Berry's Louie Louie. You've likely heard the song either on the radio or used in a movie due to its popularity. However, in the 60s, it was not popular with some parents and the FBI. Soon after the song's release, parents wrote to Washington to complain about Louie Louie because they believed it was obscene. The FBI investigated the song and analyzed its lyrics for several months. The investigators listened to the lyrics and heard nothing bad, so they logically decided that the obscene content could only be heard at higher or lower speeds. Yes, they even played the record at various speeds to see if there were hidden messages hidden within. Seriously, can you imagine being the agent put on this case? Strangely, agents from the Bureau only interviewed the Kingsmen and not Richard Berry, the original writer of the song. Eventually, the government found this was a huge waste of taxpayer dollars and moved on to solving real crimes. Women in the Bureau. In 1991, we were introduced to FBI trainee Clarice Starling in the movie The Silence of the Lambs. Of course, Jodie Foster isn't an FBI agent in real life, but her role in the film did demonstrate that women are an active part of the FBI. So, what's the big deal then? Well, at the time that the film was released, women had only been serving as agents for 19 years. In fact, from its founding in 1908 until 1972, only one female agent served in the rank of the FBI. Alaska Davidson holds the distinction for being the first female FBI agent ever. She joined the Bureau in 1922 and served for 2 years. Unfortunately for her, in 1924, J. Edgar Hoover became director and ensured that no woman would serve as agents in his organization. For the next 48 years, this remained the policy of the FBI. With Hoover's passing in 1972, the doors reopened to female recruits. Susan Rowley and Joanne Pierce became only the second and third female agents within the FBI, representing a shift away from the old standards. Today, women still face huge challenges working inside the FBI, but they've come a long way since the dark days of Hoover. Most Wanted. One of the most famous things the FBI is associated with is a top 10 list of the most wanted criminals in America. From murderers to bank robbers, if you end up getting put on the FBI's most wanted list, then odds are you are one bad individual. Over its history, the most wanted list has been used as a way to get the word out about particular criminals. Yet there are some interesting facts associated with this iconic FBI creation. For instance, the whole idea of creating a 10 most dangerous list actually comes from a story in a newspaper about the worst criminals on the loose. Director J. Edgar Hoover liked the sound of that so much, he ordered an official list starting in 1950. Additionally, if you're a criminal, you don't just get put on the list. No, in more of an awards show fashion, the FBI collects nominations from its dozens of field offices and then bases their list off of that. The process is so arduous and drawn out that once you're on the list, it's incredibly difficult to get bumped off. Unless, of course, you get captured or bumped off yourself. No laughing matter. By now you know that the FBI aren't above investigating even the most seemingly trivial of things. Whether it's the music those pesky kids are listening to or rumors that some Hollywood A-lister is a communist, the FBI has shown it's more than willing to spend time looking into basically everything. According to Sacha Baron Cohen, even he isn't immune to having an FBI tail. Known for his character roles including Ali G, Bruno, and Admiral General Aladdin, Cohen's character of Borat was so good, it attracted the feds. While shooting the film, some people allegedly got a little nervous about the strange Kazakh man driving around in an ice cream truck. The FBI caught wind of this and sent agents to see what was up. In addition to starting a file on Cohen and reportedly trailing him, they also came to interview the cast and crew at a hotel they were staying at. Rather than simply meet with the FBI to show them he was a comedian and the whole thing was a show, Cohen did his best to dodge authorities and even broke his foot in the process of escaping one night. With all that behind them now, we imagine the whole relationship between the FBI and Cohen today is nice. Mob ties. They employ thousands of agents, have access to incredible resources, and have near-sweeping powers. Over the decades, the FBI has grown and developed its capabilities to take on everything from organized crime to serial killers. We imagine them as black suit and sunglass-wearing individuals who emerge from nowhere to apprehend their targets. Okay, while it is true the FBI is a pretty capable and powerful organization, even its investigations can stall. Take the case of 3 civil rights workers murdered in Mississippi in the 1960s. When the FBI's investigation started hitting roadblocks, it seemed like the perpetrators would never be caught. After all, federal agents can't torture suspects or beat them unconscious to find answers, but the mob can. To help solve the case and find the bodies of the victims, the FBI allegedly hired notorious mobster Gregory Scarpa. Nicknamed the Grim Reaper, we don't think we need to go into too much detail about how Scarpa got his moniker. The mobster was given a gun and some money before being let loose. Scarpa reportedly tracked down one secret Klansman who he beat and threatened by putting a loaded gun in his mouth. The tactic worked and enabled the FBI to find the victims, although officially the mobster was never involved. So, in addition to being listed on the FBI's most wanted list, do you know what sets Victor Manuel Garena apart from the rest? The answer? He spent 32 years on the list, which is the longest for any individual. Believed to be currently living in Cuba, Garena has evaded capture and the $1 million reward for his arrest. So that's the end of our video for today, folks. If secrets and government conspiracy stuff is your cup of tea, then stick around. We've got everything you'd want, including tips on how to avoid tracking and detection by the government. After all, that tinfoil hat can't protect you from everything. We promise we won't track you or collect your information, as long as you agree to subscribe and hit that red button before you head out. Bye-bye for now.